Welcome to the summit, What is Wholeness Here and Now? And I have the pleasure to introduce you to James Doty. Welcome, James.
Welcome. It's nice to be here with you today.
Thank you. And I have read your book, Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the
mysteries
of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Yeah, there it is. Beautiful. Yeah, and I love that book. It's a bestseller, and I understand why. And it's actually an autobiography, and it seems like a fiction book, but it's actually your life. And it's so beautiful how one lady changed your life when you were 12, and it just took your life in a different direction, and it made your life magical. And today you are a professor of clinical professor of neurosurgery.
Neurosurgery. That's Stanford.
Yeah, Stanford
Yes.
University. And you're also the founder and director of the Center of Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, and which is an affiliate of the Stanford Neurosciences Institute. So it's, you are also at the board for multiple nonprofit foundations, including the Dalai Lama Foundation. And you're also at the board of the Council of the
Parliament of World Religions.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're spread all over the world, it sounds like, in all areas, which is beautiful. So I know you're all about compassion because that was your path, and that's also what is reflected in your book. So do you want to talk to me maybe about compassion and how this lady in the magic shop changed your life?
Sure. So the definition that we use as scientists for compassion is the recognition of another's suffering with a motivational desire to alleviate that suffering. You mentioned my book, which is a memoir that discusses my own childhood, that contains neuroscience as well as what we call contemplative practice or meditative practices. What happened to me as a child was that my father was an alcoholic and my mother had had a stroke when I was a child and was partially paralyzed, had a seizure disorder, and actually was chronically depressed. And in fact, she attempted suicide multiple times. We lived in poverty. We were on public assistance. Neither of my parents went to college. And unfortunately, for a child growing up in that environment, it's very traumatic. And there's something called adverse childhood experiences, which is an area of study where one assesses events in a child's life, such as poverty, alcohol or drug abuse, or mental illness. And the higher that number, actually, the more likely the child will be addicted to substances, the more likely the child will be unhealthy physically, the more likely the child will not succeed by normal standards of society. And the reason that is because in some ways you develop post-traumatic stress disorder, because as a child, you're essentially are in chaos. You have no certainty about anything. And you cannot pay attention because you're always looking at other things, because you don't know what's going to happen to you. And as a result, this has a huge negative effect on your physiology and your ability to attend and learn. So at the age of 12, I was filled with despair, a sense of hopelessness, anger, hostility. I was becoming a juvenile delinquent. I did not have a perception of possibilities because I didn't have mentors, I didn't have access, I didn't have money. And as a result, I was very unhappy, of course. And one day I was riding my bike, and when things were difficult at home, I would get on my bicycle and ride as fast and as far away as possible. And during one of these events, I ended up at what we call a strip mall. And in this strip mall was a magic shop, and I'd had an interest as a child in magic. And I decided to go in, and there was a woman at the counter, and she had long flowing gray hair. She had her glasses on the tip of her nose, and she was reading a paperback book. And she looked up and she gave me this incredible radiant smile. And she informed me when I asked her a question that she knew nothing about magic. It was her son's store, and she just happened to be there while he ran an errand. But what happened between her and I was that in our conversations, she actually made me feel like her equal, that she wasn't looking down on me. She made me feel like I was not being judged, and she listened to what I was saying. And as I said, she had this radiant smile, and it is these attributes that can give an individual what we call psychological safety, where the anxiety that I always carried with me was immediately lifted just by the kindness of this woman. And after about 20 or 30 minutes, she said to me, and she also asked me some very penetrating questions, which normally I would not answer, but in this case I did. And she said, you know, I really like you. I'm here for another 6 weeks. If you show up every day, I think I could teach you something that could really help you. Now, I have to say, I was not self-aware particularly. I did show up, but the reason I showed up was frankly because I had absolutely nothing else to do. And also because she was giving me chocolate chip cookies. Oh. And so I showed up. And over the course of this 6 weeks with her, she taught me some extraordinary techniques, which I still use today and I think can be beneficial to anyone. And the technique she taught me was one, relaxing the body. And now in mindfulness terms, this would be called the body survey. And you just sit there slowly breathing in and out. And with intention, you relax every muscle of your body, starting from your toes to the top of your head. And in my case, this was while focused on a candle. And while I thought this was nonsense at first, very quickly, actually, it started decreasing my level of anxiety and actually made me feel better. And I found that I could attend. And as we all know, to learn to be successful, you have to be present and to attend. So that was the first thing she taught me. Then the second thing she taught me was what she called taming the mind. And this was this idea that each of us has the ability to, if you will, tame our mind. And what I mean by that is so many of us have a negative dialogue going on in our head that we're constantly responding to the negative words we tell ourselves. And that has a huge negative effect on our physiology. Plus, it limits you. It takes away your own agency or your own power. So when you tell yourself, I can't, it's not possible, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm an imposter, all of these things limit your possibilities. And what I didn't realize was that that is not real. That is what I tell myself. And the reason that is because by the nature of our evolution, negative things have a tendency to stick to us. And that's certainly helpful on the savannah in Africa. If you look at grass moving and you know there's probably a lion there, your sympathetic nervous system, or that part of our nervous system called the flight, fight, or freeze response, engages and allows you to escape, versus the other part of our autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's called our rest and digest system. And when you do these breathing exercises, it shifts you from this fear, flight, or fight response to this rest and digest mode where you're much more open, you're much more thoughtful, you have access to memories, and you have your executive control centers in your brain functioning at their best, which leads to more productivity and creativity. Now, the other aspect of that negative dialogue, though, is that it constantly shifts you into engagement of your sympathetic nervous system. And the conversation that I was telling myself was negative things that I had heard or thought I heard that I kept telling myself.
Yeah, yeah.
What happens is that once I realized that the conversation that was going on in my head actually was not truth, and that I was limiting my possibilities and, if you will, giving my agency away, it allowed me to do something else. And the problem is, many of us are more critical of ourselves than anyone else. And when you look at yourself that way, it changes how you look at the world, and you're much more critical and judgmental. And so she taught me, if you will, how to open my heart and be accepting, be non-judgmental. And what I tell people is, after the 6-week experience, even though nothing had changed in my life at home, I changed. And the way I changed was that I no longer was angry, and I was much more thoughtful and gentle with towards myself, but also towards other people. And so the anger and hostility I had towards my parents, because I felt that they weren't present for me, that they were distracted, I realized that they did not have the tools to help themselves. And when you change your perception of how you see the world, or how you respond to the world changes how it responds to you. And so people have the ability to assess people's emotional states by looking at them, by listening to their voice intonation, their body habitus. And when I changed, I realized that actually people wanted to help me, that I could do anything. And as a result, it allowed me to believe I could go to college, could go to medical school, become a neurosurgeon, ultimately a professor at Stanford, a successful entrepreneur. And this then allowed me to create the center at Stanford, the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, or CCARE, which has been a leading promoter and research facility for understanding the value proposition of compassion, because I wanted to understand how, or what drives people to be compassionate, but also what limits people's ability to be compassionate.
Yeah. And I hope you are learning a lot from your research, and we can all learn from it. And what did you find out from your research so far?
Well, what's interesting is how you think affects your body. And when you are able to shift through, let's say, a mindfulness practice or meditation practice or breathing exercise, what happens is you shift into your parasympathetic nervous system. And many positive physiologic events occur. One is your cardiac function improves, your blood pressure is lowered, your immune system is boosted, the expression of inflammatory proteins, which are associated with a lot of chronic disease states, are decreased, and the expression of stress hormones such as cortisol are markedly decreased. And when they're elevated chronically, they have a very negative effect on your health and also on your longevity. So when you're kind and compassionate, all of these things are improved, and in fact, your longevity increases. The other thing that happens is the reward centers in your brain are actually stimulated when you're kind and compassionate. And the reason that is if you look at our evolution, unlike other species, our offspring have to be cared for 12, 15 years, unlike others which run off into the forest or the jungle. And that requires us to spend a lot of time nurturing and caring for them. But why would somebody expend those resources unless they were somehow rewarded? And that reward is through various neurotransmitters, one of which is oxytocin, or this nurturing or caring hormone. And as I said, when you're kind, when you're compassionate, that hormone is released, or neurotransmitter is released, and your pleasure and reward centers are stimulated. So you actually feel good when you care for another.
Yeah, wow. That's nice that you can actually measure that, and it completely makes sense too. And it is unique, us as a human beings, we have empathy, whereas it seems like other species don't have that in the same way, at least. And also we are creative because we can think. So it's like that combination, to me, it's like, oh, it's love in action. We can be love in action because we can think out the empathy and love. We can take action to carry out that love, you could say.
Yes. Well, you know, it's interesting, though. They have done studies on a variety of species. And actually, there are a number of species that show empathy and compassion, believe it or not. It certainly evolved in us. But that being said, there are very few, if any, species that actually will attack and kill their own species. So unfortunately, and now certainly certain types of chimpanzees do that, but in general, we're the only species that will intentionally kill someone who isn't harming us. But that has to do with another part of our evolution, which is tribalism. And what happened is, as we evolved from hunter-gatherer tribes, as we evolved from the nuclear family to hunter-gatherer tribes, which was our primary survival strategy until 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, we lived in groups of 50 to 150. And once you get above a certain number, it's really hard to monitor them. But when you're in these smaller groups like that, if somebody was suffering or in pain, that potentially resulted them not being able to do their job and put the entire tribe at risk. So it was very, very important in this hostile environment that you were kind, compassionate, cared for the others in your group. The problem is, though, that in these tribes, you looked at the other or other tribes as competing for resources. And as a result, you separated yourself from them. And interestingly, I mentioned this hormone oxytocin. If you are in your tribe, and that's typically defined by culture, religion, race, ethnicity, or in modern society, socioeconomic class, if you gave a person in your tribe oxytocin, you would want to hug them. You would want to hug them and care for them. If you gave it, if you took it yourself, intranasal oxytocin, and you were with somebody out of your tribe, it would have no effect. And so that's interesting, right? There's this tribal effect that because you recognize others in your group as part of your tribe versus anyone else is outside of your tribe and potentially puts you at risk. But the interesting thing is, if you practice and you look at the other person and say, you know, they're like me, they want the same thing for their family, their children, they want safety, etc., that then results in you forming a stronger connection to them, and then it will work. So you can overcome these biases or limitations, but you have to have insight and self-awareness.
Yeah. And how do you get that insight and self-awareness? Is it like the things you learned in the magic store?
Well, that's one way. Of course, that's not available to everyone. But I think what you have to understand is that each of us can improve ourselves, but we have to understand that we have that opportunity. We have to understand what our biases are, and then work on them. We also have to understand that we can change ourselves. And that's a very unique capability where with practice, with exercise, we can change really our brain. And this is the concept of neuroplasticity. There are a variety of studies that demonstrate when you do these different types of meditative practices, parts of your brain shrink and parts increase in size. And in some ways, this is analogous to an athlete. If an athlete exercises, those muscles increase in size. And this is exactly the case with the brain. There's a saying that says, what fires together wires together. And of course, that means the more you practice something, the more you create or strengthen these neural pathways. And so that's an option for all of us to change how we see the world, to be more kind to ourselves, to look at the other as us. And all of those exercises not only improves your physiology and your mental health, but actually improves the world. You know, the Dalai Lama says, the only time it's okay to be selfish is when you're compassionate. And what he means by that, of course, is that when you're compassionate to others, you are actually receiving benefit. And I think that's really, really the case.
Yeah, it's all interconnected, right? Yeah. And because I also know you talk about kindness, like kindness is your religion, which makes sense because actually all religions, right, they do point to that, the love, the compassion, what we're actually made of, or because we as humans, we are naturally compassionate.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. First of all, the origin or basis of every religion is compassion. And again, as you pointed out, we are naturally compassionate. What's interesting is until you're 3 or 4 years old, you give unconditionally. I mean, you'll share your toys, you'll give things to others. And the interesting thing about that is, though, once you get a bit older, it starts changing. And part of that then has to do with actually the creation of culture and society. You were taught by your parents, by observations, and as a result, oftentimes you become less caring and compassionate because you start putting limitations based on where you live, who you interact with, what you're taught. And in fact, this causes a lot of suffering for people. You know, as an example, racism isn't natural. And in fact, children play together and they have no problems playing together. And then at some age, they start separating based on what their parents tell them or the societal structure. And so you have to understand that and then see that there are other possibilities, and unconditional love, forgiveness, kindness, compassion, you know, all of these things allow you actually to not only improve your physiology, but to improve your life and actually make the world a much kinder and gentler place.
Yeah. So it's like when you have that compassion for yourself, you naturally have it for others too. Or if you have compassion for others, you also have, it's like goes both ways, right? And
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And then also the connection between the heart and the brain is it's like a loop, right? So all this neurology that's going on and all this love that's going on, it's all working together.
No, that's right. You know, the autonomic nervous system, which contains the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, arise in the brainstem and are distributed throughout the body, especially in the heart. And it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And this is why, as an example, there was a researcher studying monks, Tibetan monks, and he was talking about compassion. And he told them that he was going to study their brains. And he had this electroencephalography cap that they would put on. and they all started laughing. And the reason that they were laughing is because, as they explained to him, and he initially thought it was because this cap looked funny.
Right.
They explained to him that he was studying the wrong thing, and that compassion was in your heart, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's you don't even need the science to know those things. It's like a knowing we have within us that we can find within ourselves, like you did when you were 12 years old. But Ruth, the lady in the magic store, she happened to catalyze something in you. And so that's the beauty, that we can help each other find ourselves that we already are. Right?
No, that's right. It's actually natural within us, and when we, if you will, release ourselves from what we've been taught, then we go back to this core self of being kind and compassionate and loving others. And you know, it's beautiful in many ways, because again, we are made to be that way. That's when we function at our best, and it improves not only our lives, but everyone's life.
Yeah. And then ultimately the whole world, if everybody show compassion to just even one person, then, and that like this lady, she showed compassion to you, and now you're showing compassion to the whole world.
Exactly. Well, and that's, you know, in an ideal world, we're all learning from each other, and we're learning how to be our best selves. We're learning how to help others be their best selves. And, you know, if each of us can do this, what more could we ask for?
Yeah. Yeah, true. That's nothing more. It sounds very wholesome to me. Like, and the thing is also, it's not something that's way out there in the future. It's right now, right here, right now, that we can just be who we are.
Well, that's right. And you know, part of the problem in modern society is that we're afraid of being judged. And as a result, we're afraid of being vulnerable. Yet only by being vulnerable and authentic can we really connect with someone. And the sad thing is, many people, instead of being their true authentic selves, carry this shield around of what they want people to think about them. You know, I'm a professor, I'm accomplished, I've done this, but they never talk about the pain they're suffering, or how frail and fragile each of us is. And so that's one of the problems. You know, in modern society, unlike societies of 200 or 300 years ago, where people lived in close proximity, people, their neighbors, they knew their entire lives, they lived in intergenerational families. And this in some ways defines what are called blue zones, where people normally live over 100. It's not only diet, it's human connection, and knowing that you are not being judged and that you're accepted unconditionally. And that's not true of modern society, or certainly people don't believe that. And so creating this environment allows people actually to be their best selves. And when you're able to let your barriers down and be open and authentic, and I do this in talks I give, I'm sure you've probably seen my voice crack or I shed a tear. People don't judge you that way. They want to hold you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the nature of everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, because I saw you live at a conference a few years ago, and you really touched my heart. I listened to hundreds of people there, but I remembered you very much because you had a very touching way about you. It was just like you went straight into my heart. So thank you.
But you know, the thing is, though, everyone has this ability, although they may not know it, to be open, to be kind, to be accepting. And, you know, that is really what sort of is about us, each of us being our best selves. You know, you were talking earlier about, you know, being present. And, you know, one of the challenges too is in modern society, it's hard for people to be present because they have a lot of distractions. And also, people oftentimes live in a past, thinking about regret of not doing something or having said something, and their mind is over here, or they are thinking about a future which hasn't happened, and then their mind is over here. But to connect, you have to truly be present and be in the here and now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like there is some communication between us that goes on in that we don't even aware of, probably.
Well, no, it's true. I mean, there's certain types of energy fields that are given off by our heart, actually, and even our brain waves that really allow us to entrain or share those same vibrations and have them align. And when that happens, you're very, very closely connected, and it can happen very quickly if you create the right environment for that. You know, I had a spiritual leader come and visit me one time, and it was interesting because I had not met him before, but after about 15 minutes, we were both crying and hugging each other.
Oh, yeah.
But
was it Dalai Lama?
Actually, no, it wasn't. It was an individual by the name of Radhanath Swami, who's the head of the Krishna organization. But yeah, but in some ways, also with the Dalai Lama, you feel quite close to in a very short period of time, because he accepts you as you are. You don't have to carry this projection of how you want to be seen. And whatever you've done, whatever you think about yourself, it doesn't matter, because you were unconditionally loved.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so natural, right? It's just beyond all the thoughts and the projections. We are all the same. We are really, and why have that distance between us instead of
Yes.
just being straight to the hearts of each other? Yeah.
Yes, and part of the distance that's created is because of people's fear and anxiety of the other. And this is why oftentimes people separate themselves from the other. And, when people are afraid, one of the things that they can turn to is an authoritarian leader, because that fear and anxiety creates this desire that everything will be taken care of. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there are individuals who take advantage of that and frankly lie to them because that's what they want to hear. And then it can cause horrible consequences, versus looking at the other and actually seeing yourself. And if you see yourself in the other, you cannot not be kind to them. And I think that should be the ideal for everyone as they try to evolve their consciousness, to look at the other as themselves, and then that truly allows them to be present now.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I
No,
really
you're welcome.
appreciate it. It's so nice also to listen to a scientist or doctor of medicine who knows also about the whole body and how it works there. But you're also very much a compassionate person, and in your resting in your heart and spirit. So it's beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And do you have a website that people can go to and get more information about you?
Sure. Well, you can go to our website, which is ccare.stanford.edu. You can go to my website, jamesrdotymd.com, or you can go to intothemagicshop.com. And hopefully within those websites, you'll find all the information you need. Hopefully that will allow you to go on your own path of compassion. Most importantly, compassion for yourself, which will then allow you to be compassionate to others.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You take care.
Yeah.
It's been a joy, and let me know if I can help you anymore.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I will.
You take care. Bye.
Bye.